It's another episode of Remnant Stew,
Yay.
the podcast that celebrates the weird and unusual. I'm your host, Leah.
And I'm Steve. Which one of us is weird and which one of us is unusual? I'm not sure. Anyway, today's stew is all about the animals that have braved the front lines to help militaries get a leg up on that most violent of all pastimes, and we're, of course, talking about war.
If you have an appetite for intriguing and bizarre true stories, then pull up a chair and grab a spoon for a curious helping of Remnant Stew.
Okay, so for today's oddity du jour, this is absolutely an odd story. As reported in September of 2018 by HeraldNet.com, the English seaside town of Ipswich, I hope I'm saying that right, had some mysterious nighttime activity that was freaking out the residents. For over a year, in the late evening, the distant recording of a child singing a nursery rhyme could be heard echoing throughout the neighborhood. It wasn't soothing, and it wasn't putting anyone to sleep. Quite the opposite. For several residents, the tune was the stuff of nightmares.
Sounds awful.
It's very haunting, Ipswich resident Alice Randall said in an interview with London-based newspaper The Independent. One woman, as reported in the local Ipswich Star newspaper, said she could hear the song throughout the night, sometimes just once, other times again and again for hours. It was absolutely terrifying, she said. I heard it at all times of the night, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 4 a.m. It was sporadic. Sometimes it would play just once. Other times it was over and over. And last week it played for hours. It was just horrible.
Okay, so this was a song that's playing in the middle of the night in the harbor somewhere, right? Along the harbor?
Well, it was in the seaside town, so I don't know. They didn't know where it was coming from.
I see. Okay. So they're just hearing this song. Everybody's hearing it in the middle of the night.
And this happened for over a year. One woman told the BBC that the first time she heard the song, it was the most terrifying thing ever. I went cold, and this is just a nursery rhyme, mind you. I went cold and felt sick and thought, what on earth is that, she said. For months, no one knew where the recording was coming from. It was a real mystery. The Star reported that residents complained repeatedly to their local officials, who eventually responded and tracked down the eerie song's source. And I do have...
Oh, boy, we're going to hear it?
I have a recording of the song right here. This is the actual song that they heard.
Phone the neighbors, wake the kids.
Well...
That is creepy.
Right?
So that song is playing at random times?
Random, sporadic
throughout the whole
times.
Town?
And at night. Only at night.
Oh, at night. Only at night. That's really creepy. But everybody was hearing it, not just one person was hearing it.
Right. It wasn't just in someone's head.
This wasn't a Wes Craven movie.
That was Phil, our sound guy.
So an investigation finally tracked the sound to a nearby industrial park where a speaker system at a unit inside blared a childlike recording of the song. The racket was actually an alarm system, because why not do it?
Well, it certainly is alarming.
It was alarming, meant to
It
deter
would scare anybody off.
would-be trespassers, according to a BBC report. And I think it did the trick. The reason, though, that the alarm kept being triggered didn't do much to ease the mind of the residents. It was found that the alarm was being set off by spiders scuttling across a camera link to the system. And apparently they were nocturnal spiders. A spokesman for the industrial park told the BBC that the alarm system had been, quote, very successful at scaring off intruders. I could imagine. They did not say why the industrial park selected that nursery rhyme for its deterrence.
Well, maybe we know why, because it's scary as heck to listen to.
Yes, but they did turn it down after they became aware of the complaints and then removed the itsy bitsy spider.
Oh, well, that's good.
That
was a good oddity du jour, Leah.
Very creepy. So on to today's topic. So let's talk about four-legged soldiers. I know when I think about animals in combat, the horse and the cavalry definitely comes to mind.
Well, that's true. That's traditionally, all the way back into ancient times, been horses involved in combat. But you might be surprised to know that even as recently as World War II, even though World War II was the first highly mechanized war, horses and mules were still used as cavalry, as field artillery, draft animals, and in supply trains. This would be the last war that equines had a significant role in, though. At the beginning of the war, the Russians, the Poles, and the Romanians, they had the world's greatest cavalries. We're talking in 1939 here. In fact, the first battle of World War II featured a cavalry. Unfortunately, it didn't go well for the horses. You see, on September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. And Germany came out with a very modern, brand new mechanized military machinery, tanks and heavy weapons, and the Polish army marched out on horseback. And it was a bloodbath. It didn't go very well for the Polish army, as we know. The Germans rolled over them pretty quickly. But there was another.
Horses.
The Polish had something better happen to them with another animal later on, which we'll get to. Now, horses, like we said, that was kind of their the last heyday at the beginning of the battle. But the mule, well, that's a different story. Mules found really great purposeful uses in World War II. A mule, if you don't know, is a cross between a male donkey and a female horse. While they may have had a reputation for being stubborn, of course it's an expression, stubborn as a mule, I've always heard that. No army in World War II could have survived without the mule. They could carry anything from weapons to medical supplies, and they could travel places that no horse or even vehicle could go to. In fact, most soldiers believe that mules were the best transportation for any kind of terrain except for open country. They were used in North Africa, in the mountains of Italy, and in the jungles of Burma. Without mules, necessary supplies could not have reached the fighting men. Pack mules were used by United States forces in Tunisia, that's in northern Africa, during the winter of 1942 and 43, and were employed extensively in the rugged mountainous terrain of Italy. If you've not been to Italy, it's mountainous from the top of the boot all the way down to the tip. In the hard mountain fighting near Monte Cassino, pack animals were extensively used. During 1944-45, the 10th Mountain Division employed over 14,000 mules. That's a lot of mules, right? In the rugged terrain of northern Italy. Animal pack outfits were also used in the China-Burma-India theater, especially during the active combat operations in Burma. Very often, the Army would procure animals in the theater when troops were operating, and in emergencies would commandeer animals on the spot. But there have been many other types of animals used in war, and we're going to talk about some of the more unusual ones today.
That's right. So from Listverse, I got a bunch, a list, if you will, of a bunch of animals. And I know that we've talked about glowworms before.
Oh, that's one of our favorite topics around here.
That's right.
Glowworms.
So these insects were undoubtedly glowworms and garden slugs, let's say that. These two insects were undoubtedly some of the strangest participants in World War I. Thousands of glowworms were captured in jars to provide illumination in the trenches for reading letters, maps, and intelligence reports. But slugs, they had a less obvious use. They were used as an early warning system for mustard gas. The U.S. Army tested a slew of animals, including cows, rats, mice, dogs, cats, guinea pigs, fleas, and flies, but ultimately settled on the humble garden slug.
Now, I can imagine this lab. Okay, we're going to test fleas. How would you like to be the soldier who got that job?
Yeah, that had to use the
Let's
fleas.
see if this flea can detect the mustard gas. No, I think he didn't.
All other animals developed pneumonia during testing.
Yeah.
I wonder if the flea did.
I don't know.
Anyway.
Flies. This fly has pneumonia. We can't use him. Scratch him off the list.
I think they scratched fleas and flies. Scratched fleas off the list. Anyway, sorry.
Good one, Leah. Good one.
It turns out that slugs could detect 1 particle of mustard gas per 10 to 12 million particles of air, at which point
pretty accurate.
They'd indicate their discomfort and provide ample time for soldiers to don gas masks. The danger point for humans is 1 particle per 4 million. So they were really good at their jobs. As such, they went into battle with the Doughboys in July 1918.
Well, very good for the slugs.
Okay, next we have exploding rats.
Now, who wouldn't love a story about exploding rats?
And I got to say, okay, so our stories today, they're not too kind on the animals, but no animals were hurt in the recording of this episode.
That's correct.
During the dark days of 1941, the United Kingdom was desperate to find ways to hit back at Germany. Charles Fraser Smith and Section 19 of the Special Operations Executive, SOE, often considered the inspiration for James Bond's Q, devised many unique weapons. Foremost among these was the rat bomb.
The rat bomb, yeah.
The idea was to place explosive-laden rat corpses in the German coal supplies to disable boilers. So can you imagine shoveling in coal and...
Uh-oh, there's an exploding rat in this lump of coal.
SOE procured 100 rats for this purpose. So, yeah, they just sent people out to gather rats. The rats were meticulously skinned, filled with plastic explosives, and then sewn back up. Unfortunately, the rats were intercepted on their way into occupied Europe, and, and with the scheme unveiled, were never actually put into practice. Bizarrely, the rodents still succeeded in interfering with the German economy, which was disrupted by a continent-wide search through coal supplies.
Well, it made people stop and look at their coal, even though the
right.
rats never got there. The fear factor was there.
I guess they didn't know if they had intercepted the first shipment or, you're right.
One might have slipped through.
And so the trouble caused to them was much greater success to Britain than if the rats had actually been used. So more generally, the Germans experienced such a fascination with the device that it is often exhibited at military schools.
Yeah, that's interesting. Very cool. Well, now, I mentioned earlier the Polish had a rough start during at the beginning of World War II. In fact, you probably know that Poland was conquered by Germany from the west and Russia from the east. And a lot of Russian soldiers were captured. Polish soldiers were captured and sent to prison in Russia. Franklin Roosevelt, though, convinced Stalin that those Polish soldiers could be effective in fighting the Germans, and so many of them were released and made their way back across Russia. And so one of them picked up an unusual mascot along the way. And this is the story of Wojtek the bear. The soldier bear who was promoted to corporal. Today in Edinburgh, by the way, if it's in Scotland, it's Edinburgh. In Edinburgh, Scotland's West Prince Street Garden stands a statue of a bear commemorating one of Edinburgh Zoo's more unusual former residents. Wojtek was nicknamed the soldier bear. He had a colorful life with the Polish army before retiring and living out the rest of his days in Edinburgh. An orphan bear cub is the way she was started. In 1942, a group of Polish the Second Corps soldiers and civilian refugees were evacuated from the Soviet Union and were making their way to a refugee camp in Tehran, Iran. While stopping over at the town of Hamadan, the group came across a young Iranian boy with an orphan bear. Enamored with the cub, Lieutenant Anatoly Tarawecki purchased. I probably said that wrong. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm glad you're doing this.
Tarnavecki. Now we've got it right. Purchased the bear, and for the next few months it lived in the refugee camp at Tehran. In August 1942, the bear was donated to the 2nd Transport Company, later the 22nd Artillery Supply Company, and he was named Wojtek, pronounced V-O-Y-T-E-K, Wojtek, by the soldiers. The name roughly translates to joyful warrior, and Wojtek soon embraced army life. The young cub was fed condensed milk from an old vodka bottle, as well as fruit marmalade, honey, and syrup. When he became older, Wojtek was given a military ration, in fact 2 portions, as he was growing to be pretty big. Surrounded by soldiers all day, Wojtek began to pick up their habits. He copied those soldiers and mimicked their behavior. He became a source of entertainment for both soldiers and civilians as the unit moved through Iraq, Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. The bear loved to wrestle with soldiers and would salute when greeted, became an unofficial mascot of the Polish army. When the Polish Second Corps was recruited to fight alongside the British Army during the Italian campaign in 1943, the 22nd Company had to leave Egypt and sail to Italy. Now, the British had a policy that even though they were shipping rats earlier, they didn't want any pets on board their ships. And so rather than leave Wojtek behind, the soldiers thought up a rather novel way to allow the bear onto the British ships to Italy. Wojtek was officially drafted into the Polish army, and he became a private with his own paybook, rank, and serial number.
How did that even
we're not going to leave him on here. Let's just,
How did that even work?
well, the Polish government was kind of in exile at the time, so there was nobody to say no. So we just wrote him in. Beer became his favorite drink, and he also, well, it says he smoked cigarettes. Actually, he kind of ate the cigarettes because, he saw the soldiers smoking them, so he wanted one also. Private Wojtek lived with the other soldiers in tents, and he helped out around the camp. On one occasion, Wojtek discovered an enemy spy lurking about in the unit's portable shower. The spy was so frightened that he surrendered on the spot. I guess so.
Wonderful.
Yeah. It was reported that Wojtek helped during the Battle of Monte Cassino by carrying crates of ammunition to the soldiers. He mimicked the soldiers when he saw men lifting crates, and he copied them. Wojtek carried boxes that normally required 4 men, which he would stack onto a truck or other ammunition boxes. This service at Monte Cassino earned him a promotion to the rank of corporal. In recognition of Wojtek's popularity, a depiction of a bear carrying an artillery shell was adopted as the official emblem of the 22nd Company, and we have a picture of that. We'll put that on our website. We have a picture of Wojtek also. After the war was over, the Polish unit was transferred to Scotland, and, of course, Wojtek went along with them. When the unit was decommissioned in 1947, Wojtek found a home in the Edinburgh Zoo where he lived out the rest of his days.
So that's a good story. The animal survived.
Animals survived the war and provided valuable service.
That's right.
And
so
drank their beer, but that was okay.
Okay, so we have some more from List First.
All right.
One of the most visceral reminders of previous wars is the presence of uncounted landmines scattered across old combat zones. Mm-hmm. These mines present a real danger to civilians, and it's estimated that at least 70 countries still have forgotten mines buried beneath the soil. So clearing away mines with human labor is time-consuming and deadly, so
Dangerous,
animals are often used for this purpose. Mongolia even reportedly offered the U.S. 2,000 monkeys to help clear old landmines or minefields. Right. But like humans, monkeys are still heavy enough to accidentally trigger a mine, which is why Charlotte Dulst is working on a genetically modified mouse that will be able to work with soldiers to accurately clear out more than 300 square meters of land in just a few hours. The mice are modified to be able to detect scents 500 times fainter than normal mice, and small enough that they don't accidentally set them off, and in the process potentially saving thousands of lives.
Yeah, this is a huge problem in many parts of the world where mines have been, and that's an encouraging thing. So these mice have been altered to be able to detect these scents much stronger than normal mice. I said that's a great service, and probably many people will not have to face the terrible prospect of losing limbs or even losing their life to leftover landmines.
That's right.
Now, we talked about the bear and we talked about the horses and the mules, very important during World War II. But did you know there was another very famous animal that only weighed 4 pounds and was highly thought of by the soldiers around him? His name was Smokey. In February of 1944, American soldiers were marching through the jungles of Papua New Guinea, searching for Japanese troops and positions. The jungle was hot and steamy. Frequent thunderstorms appeared without notice. As the soldiers were walking, one of them, named Ed Downey, heard a noise that sounded like a muted howl and a whimper. Downey searched further and discovered an abandoned foxhole, but it wasn't entirely abandoned. Peeking out of the foxhole was a very small dog. The dog was covered with mud and dirt, and he looked exhausted. Downey brought the dog to a truck where other soldiers were waiting. "Anybody want this mutt?" Downey said to the other men. "I'll take him," said a man named Sergeant Dare. "Maybe I can trade him for some poker money."
Aww.
Dare picked up the dog, and he brought it back to his camp and carried it into his tent. He decided to start cleaning it up by clipping off all the muddy, matted fur. Soon the soldier's tent mate walked in, a corporal by the name of Bill Wynn. "What do you got there?" Wynn asked Dare. "Some odd little creature that Downey found in a foxhole, but he ain't no fox, I don't think," said Dare. Bill knelt down to examine the creature. "Oh, it's a little dog. I've raised all kinds of dogs back home in Cleveland, but I've never seen one like this," he said as he looked. "I'll tell you something, though. It's not a he. She's a she." Wynn bought the dog off of Dare for about $6, and he named her Smokey for what was left of her grayish-blonde fur. After a bit of research, Wynn discovered that Smokey was a Yorkshire Terrier. Now, how she got to Papua New Guinea, nobody knows. Wynne found some food and water for Smokey, and soon she was up and following him wherever he went. Corporal Bill Wynne, he was assigned to the 5th Air Force 26 Photo Reconnaissance Squadron, a photo research unit, which developed and interpreted pictures that had been taken from airplanes flying over Japanese positions. Much of their work was done in a large windowless trailer where film was developed and photos printed. Smokey was a regular fixture in the developing trailer, spending her time curled up in a corner while Bill worked. When Bill wasn't working, he spent his time playing with Smokey. He quickly realized that Smokey was a quick learner. In very little time, she learned how to heel, stand, stay, roll over, and play dead on command. Soon he began teaching her more complicated tricks. Smokey learned to walk on a barrel, which was rolling on its side. Then Bill set up 2 step ladders and attached 2 cables between them. With very little difficulty, Smokey learned to walk the tightrope between the ladders. The other soldiers in camp watched in amazement as Smokey even performed these tricks blindfolded. The little dog appeared to love to perform and would jump around in excitement as the other soldiers applauded and cheered for her.
Oh, wow.
One trick that Smokey performed was especially helpful to the soldiers. Her acute sense of hearing enabled her to detect Japanese aircraft long before anyone else. When she recognized their distinct roar, Smokey would run around in circles chasing her tail, then she would jump in a foxhole. That was the signal for all the other soldiers to take cover, for an air attack was imminent. Smokey is credited with surviving 150 air raids in New Guinea. Pretty amazing, isn't it?
That is amazing.
A military newspaper called Yank Down Under, this was for the soldiers that were serving in the South Pacific, was holding a contest to find the best mascot in the Southwest Pacific area. Bill borrowed some film from the photo lab and began taking pictures of Smokey. He had her curl up inside his Army helmet to show how tiny she was. In fact, we have that picture also. Then he snapped pictures of her on the tightrope. With the help of several soldiers, Bill rigged up a parachute for Smokey. One soldier climbed a tall tree while 2 other soldiers held a blanket. Bill snapped photos as Smokey was dropped from the tree into the blanket with her parachute deployed. The pictures, along with a description of Smokey's exploits, earned her first place in the contest, and she became well known throughout the South Pacific Theater. A short time later, Bill came down with a case of dengue fever. Dengue fever is a mosquito-transmitted illness, kind of similar to malaria.
Right.
He was taken to a field hospital for treatment, and Smokey was left in the care of other soldiers at the photo unit. After a few days, they took Smokey to visit Bill. Seeing Smokey again greatly cheered Bill and helped to speed his recovery. Now, the medics at the field hospital recognized Smokey from her picture in Yank Down Under. They asked Bill if he minded if they took Smokey to visit some of the other patients. Many of the men in the hospital were severely wounded. Some were missing arms or legs, and most were showing the effects of severe battle fatigue. The doctors and nurses were amazed as men who had been completely unresponsive became animated when Smokey was placed on their bed. She would curl up next to them, and they would slowly pet her. Sometimes they would laugh or cry or speak for the first time since their injury. The results were documented in medical journals, and Smokey is credited as being the very first recognized therapy dog.
Oh, good dog. Good Smokey.
After Bill recovered and was released from the hospital, he had made it a point to take Smokey to visit wounded soldiers whenever he had the opportunity. As the war progressed and the Japanese slowly retreated, Bill and Smokey were frequently on the move. From Papua New Guinea to the Admiralty Islands and eventually to the Philippines, they traveled by truck, plane, and ship. Smokey flew along on 12 air, sea rescue, and photo reconnaissance flights. She was also credited with 12 combat missions and awarded 8 battle stars. Bill made a special kind of a blanket sweater for her, and her decorations were pinned to this blanket. She and Bill also survived a typhoon while sailing near Okinawa. When they reached the island of Luzon in the Philippines, Smokey earned a new distinction. American forces had captured a Japanese airfield. However, in order to make it operational, the Signal Corps needed to run a telephone line underneath the runway. It would have taken 3 days of hard labor to dig a trench across the runway, making it unusable during that time. This would also have placed the construction workers at risk as the Japanese were still bombing the area. An 8-inch culvert ran the full 70-foot width underneath the runway. The engineers approached Bill to see if Smokey could carry the line through the culvert. After the war, Bill described the operation to a news reporter. I tied a string, which was tied to the wire, to Smokey's collar, and ran to the other end of the culvert. Smokey made a few steps in and then back. Come, Smokey, I said sharply, and she started through again. When she was about 10 feet in, the string caught up, and she looked back over her shoulder as much as to say, what's holding us up there? The string loosened from the snag, and she came on again. By now, the dust was rising from the shuffle of her paws, and as she crawled through the dirt and the mold, and I could no longer see her. I called and pleaded, not knowing for certain whether she was coming at all. At last, about 20 feet away, I saw two little amber eyes, and I heard a faint whimpering sound. At 15 feet away, she broke into a run. We were so happy at Smokey's success that we patted and praised her for a full 5 minutes. Smokey's heroic exploit meant that the 250-man construction crew would not have to put themselves at risk to bombing, and also that the 40 planes assigned to the base would be able to carry out their assignments without delay. After the war, Smokey accompanied Bill home to Cleveland, Ohio. For the next 12 years, she continued performing for local television shows, circuses, nightclubs, and hospitals. Bill became a professional animal trainer, even working briefly in Hollywood. Smokey died on February 21st, 1957. The city of Cleveland erected a monument to her titled Yorkie Doodle Dandy. The monument sits in Cleveland's Green Necklace Park system. On top of the monument is the sculpture of Smokey peeking out of the Army helmet.
Oh, what a good dog.
Sweet dog, isn't it? Great story.
I love dogs. We don't deserve dogs. Okay, so this episode's called Four-Legged Soldiers. But not all animal soldiers had four legs,
that's true.
And this is one of my favorites. Again, from
This is an old story.
Yeah, it goes way war
back.
has been going on from
long
for
time,
time
yes.
immemorial. So Hannibal's snake bombs, as any historian will tell you, Hannibal was a pretty decent military general. His strategic genius played a decisive role in the Punic Wars and put a huge thorn in Rome's monolithic side for years. Hannibal is probably most famous for leading an invasion force, elephants and all, across the supposedly impassable Alps to attack Rome from inland where they least expected it. Like a pre-Christ Lawrence of Arabia, but his most bizarrely creative strategy was yet to come. Here's the short version. Years after the Punic Wars, Hannibal was waging his own battle against Eumenes. Do you think that Eumenes the
Why not?
second?
Eumenes.
That's right.
Eumenes the second.
He's not alive to be ticked off that I can't pronounce his name. King of Pergamon. It was a boat battle, and Hannibal was outnumbered, but he came prepared. He had already figured out which ship carried the king, so as soon as his own ships were in range, he immediately began launching jars full of venomous snakes directly onto that one ship, ignoring the rest of the fleet. That's
a very effective tactic.
The king freaked out, turned and fled, and the rest of the ships followed.
They're firing live rattlesnakes at us. Get out of here.
And then we have turkey parachutes.
Well, why not?
In the middle of the Spanish Civil War, some 1,200 nationalist civil guards found themselves trapped in the mountain monastery of Santa Maria de la Cabeza. Crucial supplies of food, medicine, and ammunition could only be obtained by air. Facing a shortage of parachutes, the nationalist pilots devised an ingenious solution: attaching supplies to live turkeys.
Wait a minute. I think I saw this episode on the WKRP in Cincinnati.
I was wondering if you'd bring that up. They weren't frozen turkeys.
Oh, well, that's good.
They were live turkeys.
As God is my witness, I thought turkeys could fly.
We're dating ourselves here. Yeah. The turkeys naturally flapped their wings, which slowed their descent and enabled them to deliver fragile supplies. Furthermore, having fulfilled their parachute function, the turkeys provided a welcome source of food for the besieged. So the turkeys didn't necessarily
the turkeys did their job, then they got eaten? Wow.
That's right. Nevertheless, after 8 months, the defenders, who had staunchly refused to surrender, were overcome by a mass assault of 20,000 Republican troops. The nationalist leader, Captain Santiago Cortez Gonzalez, was mortally wounded in the final assault, during which his final order was, "The civil guard die but never yield," and he became a national hero.
I thought it was going to be, do we have any stuffing for this turkey? Maybe some potatoes.
Oh, and going on to more animals that aren't four-legged but still could help out. The bat bomb, Project X-ray. During World War II, military scientists on both sides of the struggle were actively searching for ways to get the upper hand. One idea that came from the U.S. was the bat bomb, codenamed Project X-ray. Developed by Lytle, that's L-Y-T-L-E, Lytle, S. Adams, I can pronounce Mr. Adams, was actually approved for use by President Roosevelt. The bat bomb consisted of a large empty bombshell which was packed full of hibernating bats. At a certain altitude, the bombshell would open and the bats, woken up by the warm air, would swarm out by the thousands. Each bat had a small charge with 17 grams of napalm attached to it, so this was not good for the bats. Right. When the bats landed on the trees and houses of Japan, the tiny bombs would ignite and set everything on fire. The project was at one point one of America's main strategies, and thousands of Mexican free-tailed bats were imported for the cause, but it was eventually shut down to invest more money in the atomic bomb.
Well, you can kind of see the reasoning there. The atomic bomb might have been more useful in ending the war, but I kind of like the idea of thousands of bats descending with little charges of napalm.
Oh, but I love bats too, and they didn't fare so well for them.
But that program was discontinued, though. Now, you might remember, Leah, the old 1973 movie Day of the Dolphin, in which dolphins were trained by a couple in Florida, but their backers were actually trying to use the dolphins to explode the presidential yacht. But in fact, dolphins have been used by the United States military since the 1960s. The U.S. Navy has had an active branch dedicated to one purpose: training sea creatures for war. If that sounds awesome, that's because it is. Most commonly, bottlenose dolphins are trained to detect underwater mines and then alert a nearby patrol of their presence. In Seattle, dolphins and Californian sea lions are also trained to detect human intruders. When a dolphin spots a swimmer, it will swim to the nearest Navy boat, after which a sea lion will approach the swimmer with a metal cuff and lock it around the intruder's leg. Now, that's pretty good teamwork by the dolphin and the sea lion.
That is amazing, actually. And I can imagine having that being done to me. Right. It's like, what is going on?
I don't know if it's actually happened, but it sounds like a good thing anyway. Now, back in the Cold War days, the old Soviet Union supposedly had a military unit for wartime marine mammals and would train dolphins to attack enemy ships by differentiating between the sound of the ship's propellers. A few years ago, the dolphins were sold to Iran to be stationed in the Persian Gulf and have been hilariously dubbed mercenaries by the Iranians guard there. Now, finally, we get to we like sharks.
Modern day, and this is more modern day.
And we like sharks here at Remnant Stew. In 2006, the Pentagon unveiled a program regarding potential brain implants for fish, wherein a bundle of electrodes would be inserted into the creature's brain to allow the stimulation of the central nervous system via remote control. While the device was meant to assist research into how animals interact with their environment, as well as to provide insight into human paralysis, the Pentagon also suggested potential military applications. The Navy sought to capitalize on a shark's ability to glide quietly through water, allowing it to trail in a ship's wake without being noticed. Sharks are also capable of sensing delicate electrical gradients and chemical waste, adding to their potential stealth capabilities. Unfortunately, nothing seems to have come from this project. It seems like it would be an awesome project.
Well, as far as we know, because
it could be on the hush-hush. We don't want to be releasing any secrets here at Remnant Stew. Unless, of course, Deep Blue Sea has happened and the government has just covering up the fact that super intelligent sharks now inhabit the ocean. That's a little bit frightening, though. I'm thinking, we shouldn't really be messing too much with sharks because they could turn on us,
Well, but it's a remote-controlled shark, so yeah. I'm thinking
But who's controlling the shark? That's the thing.
But and I thought when you mentioned sharks, I was really hoping it was going to be a shark bomb, but I guess not. Okay, so that brings us to the trivia challenge.
Okay.
So the trivia challenge question from our last episode, which was the spooky episode, was what famous person whose name was Eric died on Halloween, and he was known by another name? Well, Harbin Gould.
Yay, Harbin.
Congratulations. Okay, you guys have to get in there and give Harbin some competition.
He's running away.
That's right. So, but we love you, Harbin. He commented on our post and said Eric Weiss could escape almost anything, but he could not escape death on October 31st, 1926 in Detroit, Michigan.
Right.
Eric Weiss was most famously known by a stage name as Harry Houdini.
Harry Houdini, right.
The illusionist, escapologist, and stunt performer. So did you know that Houdini was a huge skeptic of the spiritualism movement at that time?
I had seen a movie about him that was a big part of it. Yeah, he was a big skeptic of it.
That's right. He dedicated the last few years of his life to debunking mediums and the seances.
Right.
And it was because his mother died and he tried to contact her.
Right.
And a medium, and I'm doing this off the top of my head, so don't, but I think a medium did something where she wrote him a letter. His mother wrote him a letter in English, and she had never learned to write in English. So he knew it was a fake,
right.
And from then on, he had a vendetta.
Right.
And what we have for today is around 700 years ago in what is now the Czech Republic, a royal family had a rather unusual moat built around their castle.
I love this question.
So a moat is a canal or
protection area around the castle.
Right, usually filled with water, but this one, instead of being filled with water, was filled with a specific formidable animal. And those animals are still kept in the moat to this day.
I've actually been to this place and seen it, and it's an amazing place for sure. So if you think you know the answer to that question, well, here's what you do. You like and follow our Facebook page at Remnant Stew Podcast. Like and share this podcast episode. Put your answer to the trivia challenge question in the comments of that post. The first person to do that will be the winner and will be mentioned on the next episode of Remnant Stew. Oh, and I have a little book.
Right.
I have a little book.
We actually have a prize.
A prize about Smokey the dog that we read about a little bit earlier, if I can get it away from my grandchildren. So that's going to be our prize for you if you win that, if you get that trivia question right and you're the first.
And that's what we have for today. Remnant Stew is created by me, Leah Lamp. Dr. Judy Meeker and I research, write, and host each episode. Philip Sinquefield is our audio producer,
Yay,
and
Phil.
He tries to make us sound good. Our theme
he's got his work cut out, doesn't he?
He absolutely does. Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod, with voiceover by Morgan Hughes. You can connect with us through Facebook and Instagram. If you have an idea you'd like to hear us cover in a future episode, send us an email at staycurious@remnantstew.com.
Now, before you go, please hit the subscribe button so you won't miss an episode. Maybe take the time to give us a review on iTunes.
We love 5-star reviews.
Share Remnant Stew with your friends, family, your realtor, your funeral director, and anybody else you might come in contact with. And now, until next time, remember to please choose to be kind and always stay curious.